Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first, and this is going to be part of a series of webinars we will be hosting in the coming weeks. Today's topic will be how to create a flexible and affordable DevOps Kickstarter. Before anything else, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for taking time out to be here. And we really hope we can share some useful information to you after this presentation. Okay, my name is Jonas Lim. I'm from Exist Software Lab, and I'll be facilitating this webinar for the next 60 minutes. With me is Dennis De Vera. He's one of our technical architects, and he will be sharing his insights on DevOps and steps to kickstart DevOps journey. Also, we have our friend from Microsoft, Sindhu Chengan. She's the open source lead for Microsoft Asia Pacific. She'll be sharing her insights as well and some use cases in the DevOps process. Now, at the end of the webinar, our goal is for everyone not to only have a good understanding of DevOps and what it can bring to your organization, but more importantly, what we're looking at is for you to be able to understand what that first step is when going to that DevOps journey. Our goal is for your organization to be thinking, what is that first step for me to go to the DevOps process? Based from our experience, DevOps implementation is really more of a gradual process than a big bang approach where you try to implement it one go. So knowing that first step and executing that first step is really important, and it's something of a goal we have for this. Okay, to get the most out of this webinar, I would highly recommend note taking. We'll be covering a few topics, and taking notes would help you organize those topics in a way that is more convenient for you. Also, if during the course of the webinar you have any questions or clarifications, please don't hesitate to ask questions using the question mark button. I think it's located on the right side of your screen. We also have a Q&A after the presentation. If you have more questions, we are more than happy to answer them to the best of our ability. Also, during the webinar, we are going to be, maybe later part of the webinar, we're going to be presenting a poll of topics relating to DevOps that we're going to be discussing for future webinars. These type of webinars will be more of like in-depth workshop. So please do let us know if there are topics that you are really interested in, and we'll see how we'll try to make it work. Lastly, after the webinar, we will be sending everyone handouts to help you recall what was discussed today. All right. So now I'd like to hand you over to Dennis, who will be sharing his insights on DevOps started in your organization. Thank you. Dennis, your turn.
Yeah, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Dennis. I've been with Exist for 10 years. I have a lot of experience dealing with enterprise clients. Basically, I have around different verticals and different types of enterprises. So hopefully I can share to you some of the insights that we've had over the course of the year, and hopefully we can already jumpstart your DevOps journey. So to start with, I want to raise some of the topics that we would cover during this webinar. So first question would be, why DevOps and what's the fuss all about? Second, how does it relate to your CI/CD and your app modernization? Third would be, how can I implement it? What are the strategies that I need in order for me to achieve those? Lastly, second to the last, sorry, would be the success criteria. And last would be, how do I put it all together? Okay, I would like to take this opportunity to ask most of our attendees here, how fast can you deploy in production without breaking anything and be able to sleep soundly at night? So based on our experience, a lot of companies struggle on this one. They are not so confident that they wouldn't break anything if they actually deploy it deploy into production this day. So a poll is being displayed on your screen. Hopefully you can actually answer it honestly. There's no right or wrong question here. We just wanted to see how confident are our attendees in terms of deploying their applications to production. So we would be ending the poll in the next 10 seconds. So hopefully everyone had already answered the poll. All right. So based on the poll, 38% of you guys are actually somewhat confident, 46% are neutral, and 17% are not very confident. So hopefully, during the course of this webinar, we can actually, for those who are not very confident, we hope that you can go up the ranks and be somewhat confident. And for those who are somewhat confident, be highly confident in terms of deploying into production. So what fuzz is all about? DevOps is a buzzword. Most people would think that you just need to install a lot of tools, automate stuffs, and there goes your DevOps. However, we see it differently. DevOps is more of a culture changer. It's a process wherein each individual should be able to contribute on their own little way for it to be successful. So speaking of DevOps, most of the time it's correlated to your build automation. Build automation is directly correlated to your CI/CD pipeline or your continuous integration and continuous deployment pipeline. So most of you would basically have this diagram in mind, wherein this diagram shows you some of the components that are necessary for your organization to achieve a minimum continuous integration and continuous development pipeline for your projects. So later on, we can discuss further each individual component here. But first, let's look at it on a much bigger scale. How mature is automation strategy? So in this diagram, you can see that this is divided into three components. The first one would be your continuous integration. The second one is your continuous delivery. And the last one would be continuous deployment. So for the first part, continuous integration is the process wherein you have a central source code repository. You have the capability every time a developer commits a code, build it, validate, compile, test, and make sure that you can build an artifact out of it. So that's what continuous integration is. So if you look closely on your screen, somewhere in the middle of items number 3 and 4 is a shield icon. I'm not sure if you can see it, but this icon actually represents that there are a lot of other options before you go to step number 4. So there are instances wherein you just need to have an artifact, place it somewhere, and have the other projects use it. Some would have to do it by basically getting that artifact and deploying them manually. So those are some of the other components that are available between items number 3 and 4. So that would be for your continuous integration. Number 4, the second one would be your continuous delivery. 4, 5, 6, and 7 covers this. So this is the process wherein you deploy your application to your QA server, do your QA testing, do your performance testing, do your VAPTs here, and eventually deploy it to your UAT server, wherein most of your end users would actually validate it. So for the first few items here, 1 to 5, most of you might think this can be automated. Yes, this can be automated. You can do unit testing, integration testing, automation testing for you to be able to achieve up to this point, up to the number 5 option here. However, when you look at your deployment to your UAT server, most of the guys would frown that they would usually do it manually. And at the same time, of course, UAT acceptance would always be a manual process because, you know, your stakeholders, your end users would always have to go into your system and test it. However, the goal here is that you can automate it, you can deploy it into your UAT server and subsequently into your production server with just a click of a button. You don't need to actually burden yourself in terms of making sure that after your sign off, you just first start your provisioning of the server, etc., just for you to reach production. So that would cover your continuous delivery. For continuous deployment, this is where you actually deploy your applications into production. Of course, deploying your application into production is where most of you are somewhat confident and some are not very confident. However, with the help of your continuous deployment and continuous delivery, with the right set of tools and with the right set of configurations, you can alleviate it because you don't need an individual to actually put the application to production. So the most common experience that we have on this one is that we provide the artifact to your infrastructure guy. This infrastructure guy would actually provision a system, deploy the application, configure it, and somewhere in the middle, he usually makes mistakes. I mean, human beings are designed to make mistakes. However, those mistakes might cause a little bit of uncertainty within your organization because somewhere in the middle, you're thinking, hey, this might be a failed project. However, if you deployed it automatically with the least amount of human intervention, then you can make sure that we can actually minimize the risk of having errors somewhere in the middle of the deployment. Of course, the last part would be monitoring. How can you ensure that after I automate things up, the actual version that is being deployed is correct? How can you ensure the health of your servers are correct? How can you ensure that all the configurations that has been done is actually correct? So you have to have a very nice monitoring tool here to actually see the whole picture in terms of deployment and development. So it's not limited about having a monitor on your hardware in terms of consumption, but more on how your applications that are deployed is functioning. So I would also I would like to take this opportunity as well to ask our participants, where do they think they are in this maturity process of automation strategy? So we somehow categorize it based on items 1 to 3, which is your continuous integration phase. Second would be your continuous delivery, which covers 4 to 7, and lastly would be continuous deployment 8 to 9. So don't be shy. We've known a lot of companies wherein they don't even have a server code repository, or the codes that they have, usually their developers would copy their code inside the USB, pass it to another developer, and somewhere in the middle, the changes aren't being tracked. The end the end result would be some of the codes deployed into production are actually missing. Okay, most of you guys have already voted, so we would be closing the poll in the next 10 seconds. All right. So we have here 43% for continuous integration, 25% on continuous delivery, and we have here 32% on continuous deployment. That's actually a good turnaround because it means that a third of you guys are actually completed your continuous development or continuous deployment strategies. So for those who are actually on the first step, which is your continuous integration, later within this webinar, we hopefully can get you moving onto the next phase would be continuous delivery and subsequently on the continuous deployment. So like we've mentioned earlier, DevOps is not a one-time big time approach wherein you just install stuffs and voila, you have it. So it takes time. It takes a lot of analysis, but most importantly, your organization should have a clear policy on how you would like to do or how would you be able to achieve this manually first. Because automation is just one part. You just automate some stuffs, but if there's no concrete policy, there's no concrete flow existing, then definitely you're bound to get lost somewhere in the middle. Okay, moving on. We have here another buzzword, which is the application modernization. So application modernization, how does it relate to your DevOps? Just imagine you have your healthcare system, you have your banking system, is just packed on one monolithic application. It's a big application. A lot of features are there, a lot of functionalities are there, a lot of modules are there. Most of the stakeholders are invested in that module. Imagine how can you actually deploy it faster? So one of the solutions that came up is that you have to break those down. You have to break those down into smaller pieces so that we can actually make changes much faster. Instead of deploying your whole healthcare system or your whole banking system, imagine if you can just deploy a specific module, or you can actually augment a new feature without actually deploying the whole ecosystem once again. So the challenge usually there is that if you have your monolith, you want to deploy a new feature, the QA guys would have to do their full cycle testing. Most of the users would have to participate on their user acceptance testing. So all those little pieces, when you put it in together, it will take a lot of time. Wherein, if you have a smaller piece of code, you have a smaller piece of features, wherein there's a smaller set of individuals who would be participating on this feature, then definitely you can actually ship this one way more faster than having it on a monolithic application. So it's not to say that we cannot do DevOps on a monolithic architecture, but it would be more efficient for us to deploy applications if they are more smaller in size. Okay, so moving forward, I think this would be how we would implement DevOps within your organization. So some things to consider. Where do you want your DevOps to start? So first would be, what would be the deployment environment? Of course, we would always want to start on your development environment. We would want to start assessing first our build pipelines, our continuous integrations actually is working even before we go into production. So that's the first thing to consider. Second is your connectivity. Build automations, continuous integrations usually needs to have some sort of access to download and upload artifacts. Sorry. So you have to consider firewall, bandwidth, your security, and all of those other stuffs, which falls under your connectivity. The last would be the type of applications. Is it a web application? Are you building desktop applications? Are you building mobile applications? So these are some of the stuffs that you have to consider when you're building DevOps. So we always tell our guys that there's no such thing as a generic DevOps because there's a lot of things to consider. But in this webinar, we hopefully can answer some of the unknowns, and hopefully we can jumpstart your DevOps journey. Another thing to consider is that your infrastructure here. With all the tools, with all the process that are in place, if you don't have the right infrastructure, then you cannot even start anything. So some things to consider is that should I go cloud? Should I go on-premise or hybrid? For software licenses, should I always go directly as an enterprise license? Can I go for an open source first? Or if I am already subscribed to a cloud provider, can I utilize those tools? Then subsequently, if it's not enough, which I doubt, you can go to your paid licenses or some other open source licenses, open source tools that are available. Then of course you have to have your people, the right people who can guide your organization in terms of making sure that you're actually implementing it the correct way. People who are actually experienced in building this kind of environment. And of course, you also need to have some sort of change management. So like I've previously said, everyone needs to contribute. Your developers, your QAs, your business analysts, your product owners, everyone needs to contribute. And of course, your stakeholders. So they are actually the ones who are actually pushing for this. They are the ones who are actually seeing the benefits of having a DevOps policy or culture within their organization the most. So let me discuss to you some of the advantages and disadvantages of using cloud, bare metal, the hybrid stuffs, your software licenses, and all of those other components that are mentioned earlier. So first would be your infrastructure. Infrastructure, of course, if you go cloud, you have less management in terms of infrastructure because you don't have to maintain hardware, you don't have to maintain the network, and you don't need to actually maintain a data center. Resiliency and scalability, you don't have to have problems on that one because your cloud provider would be the one who would handle those. The redundancies in case of emergency, those stuffs, they all handle it. They also have built-in tools, which you can actually leverage, which I would be explaining later. And of course, the cost. So you don't need to break the bank just for you to be able to implement a simple DevOps pipeline. So cloud would be a great option for you since this is as a pay-as-you-go type of arrangement. So you don't need to bring in too many machines, too many bare metals or servers just for you to get your feet wet in terms of implementing DevOps. Cons would be connectivity. We all know that the internet in the Philippines is kind of lagging behind our partners, our partner countries and our neighbor countries. So this is one of the things that you might want to consider when going to the cloud. Infrastructure on-premise, of course, some of the guys or some of you who are attending have some sort of information security guidelines that you want to comply with. So, for example, in the financial industry, there's a notion that, hey, I want to keep everything intact. I want to keep everything within my control. So if these factors are to consider, then on-premise might be the way for you. However, the cons would be, of course, it's harder to scale. It's not easy to add hardware. You have your time in terms of shipping the actual hardware, configuring it, everything that needs to be configured. Of course, the maintainability, you have to consider those. And of course, your licenses for that hardware. Then you have your hybrid. So I think the most common notation here is that you can get the best of both worlds. However, the cons here is that there's a lot of latency if your network would have to communicate with your cloud consistently. So the most common use case here is that I want to have a federated system wherein I want to sync all the informations on my on-premise server to my cloud. And of course, not all hardwares are made specifically to complement your cloud provider. So you also need to consider those. So that's your hardware compatibility and your cloud compatibility. Okay. Next thing to consider would be your licenses, your softwares. So what would be the main advantage of having an enterprise license would be your support. You have a largest list of features. They are more compliant in terms of security. And of course, they are highly scalable. So the downside basically would be cost. So most of you actually have some sort of CI/CD already in place. So more or less, you would have a clearer picture of what licensed DevOps tool can offer and what open source tools can offer. So on the right side, by the way, these are some of the tools that you might want to consider in terms of going on the license path or for the open source. These are some of the steps here. So open source, basically you have you have no cost in terms of license. Second is it's easy to jumpstart. So you can just download the artifact, configure it, and start your pipelines already. So the downside would be basically support. Restricted scalability in a sense wherein most of these tools doesn't have an out-of-the-box high availability concept. And most of the time, these open source tools are non-enterprise grade standards. So I'm not saying that they are inferior to your enterprise, but you need to have some tweaking for them to be able to perform on par on your licensed DevOps tools. So for starter, I would have to suggest that we go first with the open source path because there's no cost in terms of licenses. It's easy to set up. If you have your existing virtual machines, if you have your existing cloud providers, it has a very small footprint. I think we have here the minimum that we have is that around 16 core, 32 gig, all in all type of configuration, wherein most of the tools that you need would actually fit in those kinds of hardware. So it's very easy. It's very easy, and for you to be able to kickstart it, basically we can go this path initially. Then based on your evaluations, if you need to have the additional functionalities that the enterprise applications would offer, then that's the time we can go that path. Lastly would be cloud tools. So some of you are already subscribed to some cloud providers. So these cloud providers are actually competing with each other in terms of having a very good DevOps tools, because the easier for developers or the easier for organizations to deploy their application in their cloud system or in their cloud ecosystem, then the more these customers would opt in for their services. So of course, you don't need to consider scalability and resiliency. You don't need to consider licenses because these are already taken care of your provider. And of course, some charge you very little on a pay-as-you-use type, and some actually are totally free. So if you're already subscribed to your cloud providers, you might want to check with them and see the advantages of using these cloud tools. Of course, the cons would be deployment location. So of course, if you're using cloud tools, these cloud providers are actually expecting you that you would be deploying your applications to the cloud as well. So this would be somewhat of a challenge. Next would be your network. If your artifacts are located on your internal server or internal network, then definitely you have to consider those. So those are some of the pros and cons of using these cloud tools. Okay, DevOps as a culture. So how does DevOps affect each individual within your organization? We've talked about this people consultants. So you have to have these people with you. They can actually guide your organization in terms of actually implementing the right tools, the right configurations, the right strategies for you to be able to successfully implement a DevOps culture within your organization. Project team. So how does DevOps affect your project managers, your developers, your QAs, etc., etc.? So for project managers, I think the most common function of project managers is for them to be able to make sure that the project is delivered on time. So DevOps can actually help them because it would make the process more transparent to them. It makes each individual more accountable on what they need to deliver, meaning project managers aren't left on the dark in terms of what is actually happening with your developers, with your QAs, with all of your infra guys. So he can focus on the delivery and improve the delivery process as you improve your DevOps process as well. Developers, there's a connotation here wherein if I'm a developer, if I push my code, it's now the responsibility of your QAs, of your infrastructure to make it happen that this code gets into production. So the most common notation is that my code is working on my laptop. I don't need to consider if it's not working on the server. The most common thing here is that developers would tell your infrastructure guys, hey, you did something, blah, blah, blah. So it's more on the finger pointing. But DevOps as a culture wants to minimize it, wants to break that barrier in terms of finger pointing, in terms of making sure that our developers are actually responsible to their code from the point that they commit it up to the point that their code reaches it into production. So your QAs can actually participate here by making more tests, more integration tests, more automation tests. So the more that they improve their process, the more that the quality that is being delivered improve. So for business analysts, the faster that we deploy to development, to your UAT environment, to your staging environment, makes their life a little bit easier in terms of because the end users are actually seeing the output way much faster. They can now get a clearer picture of what the end user's perspective is because there's a difference between looking at a wireframe and actually using it. So the more that uh, we can actually propagate the system into this different set of environments, the easier for our users to see, hey, we might be doing this one wrong. There might be some adjustments here. So the overall output actually improves. For infrastructure, since some of the burden in terms of deployment is actually lifted from them, they can more focus on very specific tasks like uh, hardening your infrastructure, focusing on security, focusing on the network connectivity, focusing on the compatibility of your hardware to your software, rather than checking the problem. Why is my software not running on this hardware? Then lastly is your DevOps. So DevOps is a new position here or a new participant in your project team. So basically, he is the bridge between your developers and your infrastructure. So your ops or your operations actually corresponds to your infrastructure, your network guys, those roles. So he blurs the line between developers and infrastructures, making sure that developers understand what the infrastructure guys are doing. The infrastructure guys making sure that they also do understand what the developers are trying to do. Also, your DevOps guy here is actually the one responsible on streamlining the process. He would also be responsible for making sure that the process is being improved over time. So when you first implement DevOps, you have some quirks all over the place. So the DevOps guy is the one responsible for fixing it, for making sure that you are running on your utmost capabilities and your most efficient process within your organization. So for management, for sales, for finance, your HR, and your product owners, how does DevOps affect them? So for management, of course, uh, making things more efficient means faster time to deploy or to release into production. The more efficient people are, the faster the work is done. Meaning, uh, in terms of your operations, you can minimize your operating cost by simply making your people more effective, making making yourself more efficient, making sure that the products are actually uh, of standard or is a way above standard. Because the more you deploy bugs on production, the more cost it incurs for your organization. So management takes the benefit, would have the benefit of those with DevOps. So sales and marketing, it's easier to sell items or sell products if it's already existing in the market. You can also cope up with competition if you're the one behind, because you can easily uh, ship your products faster than your competitors. Finance and HR, of course, finance better products, efficient products make their life a little bit easier because costs are down, sales are up, so it's good for the company. Human resource, they can actually benefit from this by hiring the right people, by hiring people who are actually on a more specific scale to supplement your existing team. And for product owners, of course, they can reap the benefits of having their product on market, making sure that uh, they see the capabilities of the product, how it fares within the market, how it performs compared to competitors. So they can actually make adjustments if they think that their products are subpar compared to their competitors, or if their competitors actually introduce a new feature, then definitely you can cope up faster than the traditional way. So what would be the success criteria? I think the the most common item here is that you have to improve your turnaround time, improve the quality of deployment, improve the quality of development, automate the deployment process, and of course streamline your process. So these are some of the success criteria if we want to jumpstart your DevOps journey for your organization. And lastly, uh, putting it all together, I want you to basically have an assessment where you are. So we've done this one earlier, but I want you to actually dig deeper on the process. How can you be more effective? How can you be more efficient? Can some things be automated? So those stuffs, like I mentioned earlier, these simpler stuffs, when you automate them, when you make them faster, when they compound, it makes a lot of difference. The same way as the more people who are involved in your monolithic application slow it down, the more you automate it, the faster you can start. So next would be your infrastructure. Where are you right now? Are you purely on cloud? Are you purely on bare metal? So you don't need to purchase a new hardware in terms of if you want to get your feet wet. You can just reuse some existing ones, provision a small one just for you to kickstart your journey. For tools, uh, what would be the existing tools that you have? Does these tools complement all your applications that you have right now? And of course, where are they deployed? So those things you have to consider. And people, right? People to lead change. Tools can just do so much. But if people are actually hesitant for change, then definitely it wouldn't be successful. So I think this would be my last slide. I would have a minute or two Q&A if in case you have some questions. Then after that, I would be turning turning the presentation to my colleague Sinhu, who would be discussing to you DevOps and open source solutions on Azure. I think there's no question right now. Maybe later after Sindhu's presentation, you might have some. So I would like to uh, give the floor to Sindhu for her presentation.
Hello, thanks, Dennis. Hi, everybody. Just give me a minute while I start sharing my screen. Okay, so I think I've managed to do that. Sorry, took a little bit of a technical issue. So yeah, let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, Sindhu, yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay, perfect. So let me start presenting. I'm just gonna keep this down. Okay. So yes, one, let me just quickly thank Dennis and Jonas for having me on the webinar. As Microsoft is definitely very happy to be partnering with the Exist software. As Dennis has already walked you through the DevOps journey and what you need to take into consideration before you proceed, and essentially where you want to be on that journey, whether you're looking for a completely cloud-based solution or an on-prem or hybrid. So this is a little bit about how Microsoft Azure as a platform can help you from a cloud-based as well as a hybrid DevOps journey if you choose to go that way. So I am the open source lead at Microsoft and specifically look at the Azure business. I'll quickly just walk you through some of the solutions from a DevOps perspective, as well as how we support open source. I think that is very key to DevOps specifically, given the collaboration as well as the real time, the integration, all of that happens. So I think I just want to quickly run through a few facts and figures from an open source perspective. So one is, so essentially, if you think about the Azure platform and how it is currently supporting some of the solutions and the solutions that we see that customers are deploying on cloud, we find that of all of the servers or VMs that are running on Azure, Linux is growing much faster than Windows itself. So today, over 50% of the virtual machines running on Azure are actually running Linux, and that's been growing very rapidly. So we started with almost 1 in every 5. Today it's become 1 in every 2, and we're likely going to overtake the Windows servers that run on Azure very soon. And majority of these, if you think about also the marketplace where we offer solutions, majority of those, about 60%, are open source solutions today. So you'll see that a plethora of customers as well as partners are choosing to deploy their open source solutions on Azure. We're quickly amping up our support as well from that perspective. So one key, and the question might always be why is Microsoft choosing to go support open source now? There has been some history, and the company has been very proprietary. So what caused the sudden change? It's also the mission that Microsoft and our CEO Satya Nadella have brought in or put into place. The mission being that we want to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And that does not mean only Microsoft or Windows users. It definitely means everybody, irrespective of what platforms or what software or what they're using, how we could support them. And hence, these are some of the key milestones, from an open source perspective or journey that that the company has seen. And specifically from 2014, there have been a lot of key milestones like Microsoft joining the .NET Foundation, putting that in place, and then joining the Linux Foundation as Platinum members in 2016, making SQL available to Linux users, which was, previously before 2016, it was only available to Windows users, and a whole bunch of other announcements. One of the key ones in 2018 being the acquisition of GitHub. Now, one question I also get is, why is it only up to 2018? We're now in 2020. I guess I've just run out of space on the slide to continue updating the announcements. And there have been several more this year as well, with the most recent announcements that build like Azure Arc, which offers a single plane of control for customers with their on-prem, hybrid, or cloud infrastructures and managing all of that. And the announcement was support for Kubernetes as well. Kubernetes containers have been growing in popularity as an orchestration platform. So support essentially for that was recently announced. And there have been a couple of other important announcements as well this year. So we just continue supporting that whole ecosystem. If you think about Microsoft's philosophy to open source, it is innovate, contribute, and enable philosophy. This is what it's centered around. From an innovate perspective, means releasing key innovations which Microsoft is investing in and making that open source so that others can use and build upon it. Some of the key examples are VS Code, which is one of the most popular editors today, voted by developers on Stack Overflow, and then other languages like R, like TypeScript, like PowerShell. All of these have been open sourced from Microsoft. And then we also continue to contribute to code as well as thought leadership to open source communities like the Linux Foundation or CNCF. We've also, I think, a year and a half ago, made about 60,000 patents available to the ONCF. So a lot of these are a way for the company to contribute and continue doing that to the open source community. And then lastly, and from an enable perspective, is to make sure that every developer or organization is able to adopt open source in the cloud and without having to be an expert. So this just means making a lot of the open source services, like, it could be data services, it could be things like Kubernetes. So essentially making all of these like MySQL, Postgres, or MariaDB, some of these services available on cloud, essentially giving those developers the benefit and the advantage of the cloud, but letting them continue their whatever they're currently invested in, and it's typically community versions that we support. So it just helps them leverage both the cloud as well as these open source solutions without necessarily having to be an expert, as these are managed services. So this is just a quick overview of some of the different stacks. You'll see from a DevOps as well as a management, applications, or OS database perspective. This is definitely not the end of it, but it's one of the most, some of the most popular software or tools or applications that we see that customers and partners are bringing onto Azure. So moving on from a DevOps perspective, I'd kind of like to now go a little more into detail on how Microsoft is able to help, what tools it provides developers, and what we are thinking about when we think about that end-to-end being a productive conversation. So one is essentially being able to code anywhere. So VS Code, which is one of the popular editors today, it just means you can use whatever environments anywhere and edit code from anywhere you want. And also from a collaboration perspective, GitHub today means we currently have about 50 million developers on GitHub. It is continuously growing and stays independent, stays open source. Which means that the integrations that we support with GitHub only mean that you can continue collaborating, commits and pull requests. All of that is much easier through the integration that Microsoft tools, including Teams, provides with GitHub. And lastly, shipping anywhere. The power of the cloud just means that you're able to leverage any of the data centers. There are about 60 data centers across the world, and you're able to leverage being able to deploy your solutions or applications anywhere across the world. And also making sure that your security I think security is one key thing, so that you're able to monitor, deploy, update, and whatever needs to be done, resolve that in real time. So this is a little bit about Azure DevOps specifically, which is, so the name is a little misconstruing. So this is also a solution from Microsoft, which provides you a bunch of tools from a DevOps perspective. So whether it is Azure Boards, which is for you to plan, track, etc. within your team, or whether it's pipelines when you're looking at your the build, test, the entire CI/CD part of it, and then if you're looking to whether you're looking to host some of your code, the Git repos, essential access to the Git repos, and being able to if you're looking at pull requests, and essentially all of that collaboration happens through Azure repos. And you have Azure test plans for your dev test, as well as Azure artifacts. So what I'm going to do is just quickly show you where this fits in from a DevOps perspective. Dennis has already walked you through a people, process, as well as a tools perspective. So from a typical DevOps cycle, you see that you're looking at a planning, developing, release, and continuing to monitor, operate. And this is an entire stack of the tools as well, third-party or open source tools that are currently available that you could use for any of these different cycles within your application lifecycle. Your development lifecycle, and the tools that can be plugged and played with Azure DevOps. So in addition to what I just showed you on the previous slide, you're able to plug and play any of these tools into those modules and continue using the tools that you've been very familiar with. So if you've been familiar with certain tools, you can continue bring that, whether it's Ansible or whether it's Jenkins or whether it's Jira. So you're able to bring that, and you're able to leverage Azure DevOps as well as what we provide from a cloud perspective. So just to summarize some value on why you should think about the cloud or even a hybrid approach, is that it can shorten your cycle time to much quicker times. So you will be looking at speeding up the entire development lifecycle, because if you're looking at a managed service, you can get to the development straight away without all of the hassle of the infrastructure management, and your hardware, installing software, all of that. Leverages your, it frees up your time to go ahead direct to the development. From a DevOps pipelines perspective, given that there is integration with all of the existing tools that you may be using, as well as with GitHub, it just means that it's going to be much easier for you to put your DevOps plan in place, and whether it's looking at your build or development, whatever that is in the cycle. And lastly, to make sure that you're optimizing your IT uses, resources. And if you're thinking about a dev test, so sometimes due to, as Dennis mentioned, due to restrictions where, it could be government restrictions, where you're not able to put in your data on the cloud. There could be public cloud or data residency issues. But what is something you can still leverage is putting your dev test on the cloud, so that it saves you a lot of time as well as cost, and you're able to get all of that done much faster, and then eventually move to production. So I'll quickly cover a couple of customers who've also been using Azure and some of the tools and resources I just spoke about. So Chipotle is a big brand in the US. It's a big chain, food chain, which I think they have several outlets across the country, and they built a new website using Azure, using VS Code, as well as incorporating Azure DevOps into their whole environment. So which means it's a fully managed service now with minimal IT maintenance. They've also managed to move off their own data center. Another company, which is a popular, I'm sure most of you are using Spotify's music. So Spotify is again one of the new age companies that leverages a lot of open source and is committed to it. And what they've brought on is all of what they already been using, but leveraging Azure DevOps as well as GitHub, and trying to make sure that their DevOps journey is helping them make edits and changes to their applications real time. So and they also have a lot of inner sourcing internally, which helps them. That's the true spirit of open source in a way, so that they continue leveraging that to stay ahead. Lastly, one other example is Microsoft itself, and our own journey from a DevOps perspective, as well as given the the recent situation all of us are in during COVID. The company has had to enable remote work for all of our developers, as well as all non-essential workers. Pretty much everybody's had to move to working from home with minimal impact. So so what the company did was essentially, and this is again from a people, process, as well as a tools perspective, it all has to come together. So this is how Microsoft managed the whole situation. So of course, from a collaboration perspective, Teams still continues to be the tool that everybody uses, the developers use as well. And there's a lot of integration, like I said, with the Azure boards as well as Azure pipelines. So they continue leveraging that with GitHub within Teams. And some of the learnings, yeah, are here. So I think from a team culture perspective, again, it was important to, I think at least from a headquarter or Redmond perspective, nobody there had ever worked from home. Largely the culture has always been to be in office. So this was a complete shift to that, but making sure that they are still leveraging whatever Microsoft has. And then from a tech perspective as well, making sure that all of the hardware, the setup, whatever needs to be made available, optimizing network connections, and whatever tools they need, like VS Code or other services, Windows Virtual Desktop, which is if they want to access their desktop work. So all of this has been put into place from a tech perspective. Lots of resources. So this is making sure that everybody is in their physical as well as mental best, and technology is just a part of it. And so this is, in short, one of our best practices as well. I know we're up on time and actually way past. So I'll say thank you with that. And if there are any questions, take that up.
All right. Hey, Sindhu, Dennis, thank you. So we have a quick poll. These are some of the topics that we were considering of doing a more extensive workshop. So let us know if you are interested on any of these. The current webinar that we're conducting right now is basically just a high-level, overview of DevOps and how to maybe jumpstart it. But we would be doing a lot more workshop in terms of the specific process or components within the DevOps process. Another thing is for those of you who are, let me just put my webcam. There you go. So another thing is that for those of you who've known Exist for quite a while now, we've been known for really being one of the proponents of open source, community technologies ever since we started. So for the longest time, we were quite the opposite of Microsoft, actually. So the past years, a couple of years, 2 years ago, Microsoft has really been opening up in open source, and it's a very really refreshing and welcoming news to the community and to us as well. So we will probably be doing a lot more partnership with Microsoft in terms of this type of webinars or even some projects here and there. So it's quite a refreshing news and quite a surprising partnership that we probably would have thought of 5 years ago. Okay. Oh, I see there's we'll just wait for the poll to finish. I can see there's a lot of interest in DevOps for business users, which is 62%, and the CI/CD. There you go. So we'll take this into consideration, and we'll have another set of workshop and send another set of invites. It's going to be a little bit more detailed and comprehensive, specific to these topics. I believe our marketing will also be sending out a form that would, just a feedback form and also some comments. So let us know if you need, if you're looking at some other topics you'd like us to consider to discuss later on. I would also like to thank everyone. I can see there are 44 attendees here, and there was no drop off, or I think there was one. So thank you very much. I guess if there are no more questions. Oh, there's one question. Dennis, this I think is for you.
Yeah, the question would be, in an organization who is in the first few steps of DevOps adoption, who will benefit the most and what are the most tangible results? So, that's a very good question. So, for an organization who is actually jumpstarting their journey on the DevOps, I think the most guys who would take the benefit of it is that your project teams. So it would drastically improve their efficiency in terms of how they would handle their projects, how code is actually being deployed easily without much of a intervention or manual intervention. So uh, based on our experience, normally as a developer, there are instances wherein someone would have to talk to me and ask me to deploy something into some sort of environment. And of course, it would take most of my time doing it if it is being done manually. A few years ago, that's how we do it. And it's very tedious. And at the same time, if your deployment to production is actually manual, one way or another, when I turn over the artifact to the guy who would actually do the deployment into production, somehow, somewhere, something gets messed up. So what would happen is that some of the components would be deployed, some of the components uh, would somehow have a malfunction somewhere. So that's I think those are the guys who would actually get the most benefit of doing DevOps in your organization.
I think just to add to that, one of the goal of DevOps in terms of objective is really the turnaround time, the turnaround time of being able to commit codes to the source repository and seeing it in production. Basically, that's the measurement, the end goal of DevOps, being able to put code in the repository, see it in production, and seeing there's no error. Now, the faster you can do that, the better it is for everyone. I think depending on the project, for example, there are projects like product projects where you need to go to market as fast as possible, get feedback as fast as possible. So in that regards, if DevOps can help on that one, then one of the beneficiary would be the product owner, the marketing team, or the sales team that wants to test the market as fast as possible and get feedback as fast as possible. Thank you. Thank you, Nap, for that question. All right. If there are no more questions, we'd like to thank everyone for staying with us. And we'll see you on the next webinar. Hopefully, it's going to be as interesting as this, hopefully. Oh, do we have another question from Zhang? How do we determine what the right DevOps tools are for the organization? I guess if it works. Now, it really because to be honest, a lot of the open source DevOps tools that are out there, and a lot of them what we are using right now is majority is enough. So let's say to our I guess 95% of our needs. The other part, there's a workaround. So well, one is if you're going to be having a DevOps implementation on the cloud, purely on the cloud, then the suggestion would be to use the tools that are built in the cloud, so you don't have to do some maintenance and configuration and setup and installation. However, if you're going to be doing it on premise, my suggestion would be to start with an open source tools. There are a few good tools out there. I can name like GitLab, GitHub, Jenkins, and the tools that Dennis shown earlier. So it's really more of a combination, and if the function works for you, because there are times where the tools is mostly about preference. So we have our own preference, and some companies might have their own preference. As long as the functionality matches the requirement, that should be good enough. But I would recommend to go first with an open source tool. Try test it out with open source, so you don't have to spend a lot trying it. Get your feet wet. Once it's you get the hang of it, then if you need to go to a license on the enterprise version, then go ahead. But majority of the time, open source would be enough, actually. There's no more questions. Do I need to wait like 5 seconds or 10 seconds? All right. Let's wait for 10 seconds more. All right. So guys, if there are no more questions, thank you very much again. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Sindhu, for the presentation. We hope to see you again for the next webinar session. Bye-bye.
Thanks again. Thank you, everybody.